All right. While people arrive, I just want to introduce myself. I'm Dean Malo Hudson, and I just want to welcome you all to our fantastic lecture, the Hanbury Endowed Lectureship in Historic Preservation. And it's going to be given by our own Zena Howard. We couldn't be more delighted to have Zena here. But to know more about the Hanbury Endowed Professorship, or Lectureship, I should say, in Historic Preservation, it was started in 2004. And the idea was to really bring the most prominent lecturers and intellectuals and practitioners in the field of historic preservation more broadly to come speak about the most pressing issues and the kind of work that they're doing. And you're in for a delight, obviously, today. It was established in 2004 by John C. Paul Hanbury, who received his Bachelor of Architecture degree in 1957. And Mike Evans, who's also alum of our program, received his bachelor degree in architecture in 1972. And it's also sponsored in conjunction with the Norfolk, Virginia-based architecture firm Hanbury, which was formerly known as Hanbury, Evans, Wright, and Vladas. So we couldn't be more delighted to have that support. It's brought just such prominent people such as Zena here this evening for us. And so we're very happy about that. And I also want to acknowledge all of the people who have made this possible. There's so many people that are working tirelessly to move things forward for us. And I just want to thank my colleague, Andy Johnston, who's just been a wonderful colleague to have here at the A School. Jessica Sewell, another wonderful colleague of mine. Jake Johnson, who actually, as I understand, made the nomination for Miss Zena Howard to be here, which is what a fantastic choice. And of course, Sneha Patel and Jamie Satterley, who are always trying to make things happen for us. And none of this would be possible without all of them. So I just want to say a big thanks to you all. And if I've left out anyone, I want to thank you too, because it is a group effort. And I just want to give those special acknowledgements to my colleagues who just really make the A School what it is. So I'm greatly appreciative of their work. Now I have the pleasure of introducing Zena Howard. I will embarrass Zena for a minute and say, and we already know the great work that Zena does, but Zena is just a decent, wonderful human being who has the kind of compassion and empathy. And she's someone who just doesn't talk about making the world a better place. She actually lives it, and she does it on a day-to-day basis. And I will tell you, I was so fortunate as a new dean to arrive at UVA, and I was with my daughter, and we met up with Zena in the fall, and she took time out to speak to my daughter, to take pictures with us, and just was a delight. And I can tell you that just her taking that kind of time out of our busy schedule to have these kind of conversations. Now I see the light in my daughter's eyes. It's one thing to see me, but it's another thing for her to see someone like Zena who's doing it, and she can relate to the kind of work that she's doing. And so I just want to thank Zena for that, for just being so wonderful. So with that said, let me give a nice introduction here, but about Zena. But Zena Howard is a principal and managing director of the North Carolina practice global architecture and design firm Perkins&Will. An award-winning architect, strategist, mentor, and team builder, her career has been defined by visionary, complex, and culturally significant projects, such as the Smithsonian Institution's National Museum of African American History and Culture in Washington, D.C., which is absolutely fantastic. In her work, navigates social issues of equity and justice, restoring lost cultural connections by honoring history and memory. Zena has been integral in developing and realizing Remembrance Design, an urban and architectural design process that engages historically marginalized and negatively impacted communities to redress painful issues, bridge diverse experiences, inspire resilient communities, and infuse culture into projects. She embraces cross-disciplinary collaboration as a design tool to integrate a broad range of experience and specialized knowledge, such as policy, art, econology, into the architectural process. I mean, I told you she's amazing. And projects like the Greenville Town Common, Sycamore Hill Gateway Plaza, she worked with a team to design a memorial space on the site of a former missionary Baptist church destroyed by urban renewal in the 1960s. The Sycamore Hill neighborhood, once a vibrant African-American community, was devastated alongside the church from decades of displacement. Zena and the team engaged church members and former residents to co-design both the memorial and the larger master plan for a new public park. Her current work includes Destination, a community-inspired project in South Los Angeles that will be the nation's largest art and cultural celebration of African-American contribution to world culture. Anchored by permanent and rotating art installations, 10 new public parks, exhibits, and entirely new streetscapes, this public art and cultural experience will run along Crenshaw Boulevard and celebrate the long-standing reputation of the neighborhood as a creative incubator, as well as Black LA's impact on popular culture and social change. A longtime advocate for diversity within the architectural profession, Zena's work is guided by an intense curiosity about communities, their histories, and events that have shaped their identities. It is through this lens that she provides this year's Hanbury Lecture in Historic Preservation. Zena holds a Bachelor of Science degree in architecture from the University of Virginia and is a member of the Dean's Advisory Board. Zena, welcome, welcome, welcome. We're so happy to have you.
Thank you, Dean Hudson. It's so great to be here. And I really want to thank Jake for nominating me. It's great to be able to come and speak about my work. It's apropos that it's the last day of Black History Month and we're entering into Women's History Month. So I really want to spend some time speaking with you all a little bit about what I do and why I do it. So we'll briefly share my screen that I believe you now see. Should. Okay, awesome. So I'm going to talk a little bit about, Mallow mentioned Remembrance Design and what it is and how it actually, why it was conceived, why it's important in my work and certainly in the work of our studio here specifically in North Carolina. Remembrance Design is a type of memorializing project, and it's really an urban and architectural process. So it's a what and it's a how. As a project type, it specifically is for disenfranchised and marginalized communities, but as a process, it makes time and space for recovering site-specific stories and memories, and then finding the built expression for those histories and those meanings. So it's really about looking back to go forward or imagining a sustainable future out of a reconciliation with the past. And that's why I think it's appropriate for preservation as we seek to preserve culture in a way that's unique. So in 2017, we trademarked Remembrance Design as we evolved our work to embrace buildings as well as cultural landscapes. It preserves memory, and orients to the future through the built expression, and is often representing history through the structure and interplay of spaces. So that's a little bit about Remembrance Design. Mallow actually mentioned some projects that I've just been honored to be a part of. Much of my work specializes in cultural spaces such as museums, parks, memorials, and some of our studio's most iconic designs have commemorated communities of people who have been disenfranchised or negatively impacted by discriminatory policies and practices. So while the implementation of Remembrance Design is not limited to memorialization in Black communities, its structure and ethos are informed by the specific cultural relationship of Black people to their history, their lived experience, and their orientation to the future. So a lot of what I'm going to share with you today actually focuses on that identity. So spaces for action. So, the spontaneous appropriation of cultural spaces for collective action was one observation that informed the eventual framework of Remembrance Design. The moment that we, and certainly I, realized that our memorial projects would always have the potential to be monumentalized as spaces for collective action and solidarity, we started to broaden our considerations of context for the buildings we were designing. So we started to think more deliberately about the in-between spaces throughout the site. We also started to zoom out from the physical conditions and take into consideration the social and political context that shaped and will continue to shape the spaces throughout the site. So a few examples that you see here on the screen. You see the National Women's March from January of 2017. You see the Gay Pride March. You see the March for Our Lives rally for gun violence. I believe that was in 2018. So just thinking about the actions that people do when they come together. And so Remembrance is about thinking about the monumentality, really, of our cultural work. Thinking about it not being the exclusive domain of the project's buildings and structures. So in other words, urban and landscape design, as well as public art, exhibit design, contribute to creating urban places. And these are places that engage people in complex histories. The work reflects the recognition that community partnering and investment is at the heart of these creations, is at the heart of their resulting experiences and their future relevancy, sustainability, and resiliency. So I always say cities are a battleground. They have been throughout our history of America, for sure. Our approach to preservation and creation of sense of place in our rapidly changing urban areas is really centered around identity. The intent of each Remembrance Design project is grounded in the memories and values of a collective identity rooted to a place, even when the urban fabric of that place seems to just have disappeared. Our framework enables the infusion of really a site-specific mix of historical and present-day context into the built form and into the landscape. So ultimately, this becomes an expression of the desire for future lived experience in and of that place. So the key points that relate to urban and architectural design are robust engagement, that's at its core, and a future forward look at things. Uncovering individual and collective memories was another observation that informed the eventual framework of Remembrance Design. So just as we noticed that people were drawn to our iconic projects at moments of civil unrest, we noticed that the communities engaged deeply with memory also, and their connection to a place is activated when they do that. So we started to really tap into those lived experiences of the people that we're designing for and with. So there are key, what I call, certain tenets of the design approach to this. So these four I created, and I feel like they're immutable. They never change as we approach our work. And it's expanding collaborations and partnerships. So we move beyond urban designers, landscape architects, the identity and branding designers we call on within typically, certainly our interdisciplinary firm. And we move into collaborations with city planners, social anthropologists, policymakers, research analysts. So we broaden to these more unusual pairings and partnerships. The second is leveraging urban cultural assets. As we go into urban areas, we have to understand there's something there that's of value, and recognizing the sanctity of that, and not looking at that with an attitude of leveling or raising those wonderful assets. The third is leading with culture for inclusivity in design in rapidly changing areas. Talk about that a little bit more later. And finally, recognizing that all projects are opportunities to mend physical or social rifts. So what I'd like to do is just walk you through four quick examples of building projects. And this takes our work all the way from 2009 to today. So about a little more than 10 years of really looking at this. And so what you see on the screen now is the Harvey B. Gantt Center for African American Arts and Culture. And I love this project because it's in Charlotte, North Carolina. In North Carolina, we have 2 studios, one in Durham, where I am, and one in Charlotte. This is a pretty important project because it was an unexpected site. And you can see the little magenta bar there that says AACC. That's a sliver site of approximately 60 feet by 400 feet long, 60 feet wide by 400 feet long. So it's oddly dimensioned and proportioned. Our client had been looking for a site for a long time for this facility, and the city donated or gifted this site, but it was a remnant site. It was actually the site that sat above the tunnel, the underground tunnel you see on the right, to the new Wells Fargo, now Bank of America, tower that was being built at the time. But so our clients at first were a little, like, how can the city just give us this? This is just a nothing site. But if you look at the context, it's in the shadow of the Mint Museum that was done by Machadi and Silvetti, and the Beckler Museum, that was Mario Boda's museum, the Night Theater. So we thought, but you're right here in this cultural heart. Let's see what we can do with this site. So drawing upon the vision of these museums, the goals of our client, and looking at a nearby neighborhood called Brooklyn Village. This was in the western part of the state, which is closer to where Charlotte is. This area of Brooklyn Village was an area of back in the day, relative wealth for Black people, as much wealth as they contained. African Americans owned their own enterprises, their own beauty shops, their own stores, their own clothiers, their own dry cleaners. And the image to the right is a photo of the school that they loved. It was the high school that most of the students graduated from, and when they did, they went on to attain higher education. And the edifice that you see there that they would use, and this was a classic graduation photo, they called Jacob's Ladder. And that classic picture, everybody from that community had a graduation picture on Jacob's Ladder from Brooklyn Village. So we thought about that in the notion of weaving, of quilting, of patterning that was so pervasive, not only just as cultural expression and need, but also as a way to also send messages and to communicate African Americans. So thinking about just really lifting the building up above this very practical tunnel that goes to the high rise across the street, and merging the notion of Jacob's Ladder, rising education as a means to rise above the conditions of African Americans in the South, and also weaving sort of subtly, but in a broad way, this notion of weaving and interlacing and interplay coming together around the entire building. And this last photograph I love because it's actually taken from the highway that destroyed the Brooklyn Village neighborhood. It was razed under urban renewal, just simply wiped out by the highway there. And so it's nice to see the building sort of nestled in its urban context, but really distinct and making a statement about what was once there. The next project is the National Center for Civil and Human Rights, and we're currently working on a pretty significant expansion to this museum. So you'll see that over the next couple years. This project is about inspiration to action and power. It is located on the Coca-Cola Center, right there in the heart of Atlanta, near the aquarium. If anybody knows Coca-Cola, World of Coca-Cola Plaza there. And it's got sort of this iconic form. But, when thinking about how to tell the story of civil rights and human rights, human rights, a very global story, civil rights, something that we largely think about in the United States, occurring in the United States several decades ago, we begin to look at how people mobilize for positive change. What do they do? And, these are pictures from the Arab Spring in 2010 to just various civil rights marches in the United States, and just exploring physical gestures and connection of people to each other. And we also were intrigued by diversity, diversity of size, scale. People come in all types of shapes and forms and colors and proportion. So knowing that, this notion of interlocking hands, creating a space for action, this notion of diversity, we actually just conceived of the building as just these two slabs that come together to embrace the prominent collection that's there. This center is the only place in the world where you can see the Martin Luther King papers. You can't even see it at Smithsonian's new museum. So it's a very just solid, iconic approach, making a stand about civil and human rights. So this is moving on to the third project that I'll talk about. The National Museum of African American History and Culture is, yes, indeed, it's an iconic structure. It really is symbolic of our common ideals and shared values. So it embodies these qualities of permanence that resonate and really inspire. So we know where this is. It sits, if you don't know, it sits on the National Mall. And really this project, it was 100 years in the making. I spent 10 years full time of my life on it. But it has a site that is at kind of the juncture of the Washington Monument grounds and the National Mall. So we were inspired by notions of celebration, modulating natural light, Southern American agrarian sensibilities such as the porch. And this was a collaboration of 4 architectural firms coming together to realize this vision. And these images are sort of, how the process started, with everyone just kind of bringing images, photos of what inspired them on that, to the charrette that was literally occurred in DC just the Monday after President Barack Obama was first inaugurated as president. So you see images on the mall of people celebrating the gestures that they make. And then to the right, you see a pretty significant image that David Adjaye brought forward, which is a caryatid. And that's a sort of West African art and architecture form that has a corona or a crowning feature on the head. So really looking at that image and how that sort of looking at just the clear, distinct image of that corona or that tripartite form on the mall. And you can see how it just kind of, marries the response to its context with the angle of the Washington Monument grounds. So this was interesting. So whereas the Gantt Center was sort of telling a regional story, right? And then we moved to trying to look at civil and human rights worldwide. Well, this is telling a pretty broad story of millions of people, named and unnamed, in this museum. One of the things that we knew was important was bringing forth stories, little known stories that people may not be aware of. And one of it is the wonderful ironwork that's done in areas of the Southeast, in New Orleans, Charleston, Savannah. When you go to those places, you see beautiful ironwork, and much of that ironwork was done by African-American craftsmen, slaved and free. And so we wanted to pull that story forward in kind of a modern, fresh way of thinking about how the building with this iconic corona form or celebratory form can also pull that story in. So by just abstracting a really fresh way of looking at that historic, wonderful work that people have done. And you can see, bringing in again, those notions of light and what happens with light and privileging views and modulating views for this wonderful filigree that's around the building. And looking also back to the agrarian concepts that I mentioned before, this notion of porch, and that came from the South. So you can see we're pulling in sort of West African sensibilities, Southern sensibilities, and this idea of the porch and how African Americans, although that's not something that is necessarily designed by African Americans, we used it really more so than probably anybody else in the South as a way to really mitigate between interior and exterior spaces, just because of the limitations of toing and froing in the South for much of the history of African Americans. So pulling forth this notion of a porch in a real exaggerated way on the Southern exposure of the building, obviously the most solar sensitive side of the building, but also, in a beautiful gesture that's welcoming, a knife edge gesture, a 180-foot clear span that really stands juxtaposed to the filigree, the lightness of the corona. So you can see these notions of light, of West African, of southern parts of the United States working together. This is the last building project I'll talk about because it's on the boards. And this project actually stopped during COVID, and we started doing the first for 2 years, and we started again last year. And so this is an expansion of the Motown Museum in Detroit, Michigan. Fantastic way. So here, trying to tell the story of a sound, a music, an emotion that changed America, that bridged divides that had never been able to be bridged before. So in looking at Motown, one of the things I saw was that there were 4 elements that came together. And in my opinion, our opinion, without any one of those 4 ingredients, Motown may not have existed, or maybe not in the way that it does today and the impact that it had. So it starts with the image on the right with Berry Gordy. Berry Gordy, we all know, the founder, CEO, president, and the man of Motown. Berry was raised in a family that provided rigor and structure, that stressed entrepreneurship, that stressed business acumen, and always instilled, an attitude of you can do it. And then there's Berry Gordy himself, which was a man with a vision. Berry Gordy had many failures before Motown, and he kept just going on. And so he conceived of this idea of making and producing music while working on the assembly lines of one of the big car manufacturers, and just the regular rhythm of the mechanics of the assembly line allowed him to be able to riff in his head and conceive of particular beats. The third component was the city itself, Detroit. Detroit was a city of opportunity. It was part of the first migration of African Americans out of the South to the North to escape the harsh conditions of the South. And, that city was a mecca for talent and young people coming together all in one place as a huge resource or vat that one could mine for this wonderful talent. And finally, there was Hitsville, USA, the little house that could and did. And it was the house that Berry Gordy purchased on West Grand Boulevard. He purchased that house because it was the only one in that street that had a detached garage that he called Studio A. And that's where all of those hits were made. And even the unique architecture of Hitsville came into play because they actually used the A-frame or the attic frame of the house to record, to pipe music up, let it reverberate and record off the reverberation. And that also contributes to that unique Motown sound. Everybody knows the Motown song when you hear it. So thinking about this story, that it wasn't only the artists, it was the producers, it was the performers, it was the makeup artist, it was the choreography folks, it was everything. It's such a huge story that really changed America. But when we looked at this, we really thought at that time that there was one song that really resonated back then, and that's What's Going On by Marvin Gaye. It was just a rebel song in its time, right? Who puts a song out like that? So bold, but still resonates today if you listen to the lyrics. So we sort of did this very detailed analysis of what's going on and just sound mapped the main refrain of that, and also color mapped the top Motown hits, the record albums, and pulled out the main colors that were consistently used and that were quintessentially Motown, and looking at how albums, CDs, and everybody that collected Motown stacked these things on a record, and putting the building out there, but making sure that the building behind this metaphorical record stack has a beat behind it. It has movement, so that the building moves as you move around it. And it's just on the end parts of the building, having a banner expression that really makes this building stand apart, still in a low scale neighborhood. So that's sort of moving through 4 projects over the 10 years, building projects that really look at this notion of expressing themselves culturally in a really profound way. But we also, the work takes us to cultural landscapes. And there are many projects in many cities. I'm going to share 2 of them with you right now, because these projects go from 1 acre, which is Sycamore Hill, that I'm going to share with you right now, all the way up to Destination Crenshaw, which is on the boards at the moment. But these show projects of various scale. They're built, they're underway. Sycamore Hill still resonates with me very, very strongly, because first of all, it's like an hour and a half to 2 hours from where I live. And when I heard the story of this community, it was it's just one of those things that resonate with you. So this 1 acre site, to me, it represents memory, and it's important to future. It's in historic Greenville, North Carolina. In its time, this was a thriving neighborhood anchored by their Sycamore Hill Baptist Church, which represented the heart of their community. And I think the reason why this one resonates with me, as you noticed, a lot of my projects deal with reconciling poor urban policies. And then there are other projects that we're working on in Miami and Vancouver and other places, but they all have the same theme. They were destroyed, mostly in this country, by urban renewal. The community was displaced and dispersed. In this instance, the city's coming back in 2017, 2018, and they are doing a wonderful thing, a public benefit. They're taking this entire strip of land that you see there, making a public park. But they forgot almost, in quotes, about Sycamore Hill community. These people had a thriving community. Every child in that community along that strip went to that church, and just about every single one of them went on to become stalwarts in their community, become contributors at a very high level. They went on to higher education. And this one resonates with me because it was just wiped out and nothing was put back. At least, you know, you can say, well, there was a highway, none of it's justified, but this was just destroying a community just to displace it and disperse it because you just don't want it there. And the community worked to save the church, but subsequently, shortly afterwards, I mean, you can see in the image, the road even kind of wraps around the church. The church fell to presumably arson at the time. So when the city came to look at revitalizing this entire strip, they got to this little 1 acre on the corner, and wonderfully the community stood up and said, you know, no, you're not going to not recognize what happened to us. We still live in this community. The people, those of us that were just tossed out of our homes, are still here. And so we were brought in to think about what to do there. And we started by encouraging the Sycamore Hill community to share stories, artifacts, and mementos that were meaningful to them. So through their own engagement with their memories and aspiration, they crafted a rich narrative of the cultural vitality, the collective betrayal, the loss, the despair, and the healing specific to their spiritual home along the Tar River. So these themes that came out were community, the pride that was felt, spirituality, the music, the structure. There were people, even not from that community, that talked about standing on the corner across the street from that church and hearing these wonderful songs just emanating from the church, beautiful music, spirituality, and just celebrating and worshiping. And then finally, history, memory, prominence. They were so proud. The pride, and the hurt was just so devastating. They lost the prominence that they thought in the community. So we looked at the sort of original church, an old plan of the original church, and it's almost in the exact location where it is. And there were 22 founding members. The majority of them are also women, which was also another interesting fact at that time. So, we looked at the most significant elements that people talked about that, made this place memorable to them. The notion of gathering, reflection, rejoicing, entry, that prominence that I talked about, all came out of our deep discussions with them. And so we conceived of something that brings back. We never want to replicate. We just want to recall that experience of gathering, with seating, interpretive walls that tell the stories, so many stories of the folks in this community, the stepped viewing terrace that they used to use to go down to the Tar River for their baptism. They actually used to do baptisms in the river. And most of all, the big, huge, beautiful sycamore trees that still exist on that site today. So early renderings and ideas, we looked at recalling these spaces back, and we brought in notions of stained glass, the pattern of which is the pattern of the community, the plats, the lot sizes that were removed there. We just did an interpretation on those patterns and brought back the feeling of worship, the feeling of reflection, the feeling of memory. And you can see in the sort of built environment, preserving those sycamore trees while bringing back the prominence, but bringing back the stories of the people that were there, and hearkening back to this notion of pride, of place, and sense of place. Really thinking about how this connects to the larger, although it's one acre of this total, riverside development, we had to think about the views and the connectivity, and always tying it back to that natural part of it. So the last project I'm going to talk about is actually a project that can be talked about for an hour in itself, and I always have a difficult time condensing it down. This was another head scratcher when our clients came to us. By the way, our clients in this case were politicians, so it was really like, huh? And they thought, we want to do something that's never done before. This project is called Destination Crenshaw. It's in Los Angeles, California, in South Los Angeles. Most people familiar with there know the sort of market intersection of Slauson and Crenshaw Boulevard. But really, this project represents celebration, community, place, and engagement. And so it's hard to describe. At first, the client said, well, we want an outdoor museum. And so we're like 1.3 miles. So you think about it as a community-inspired public art and streetscape design project. And this aspires to highlight the world-class contributions of Black Los Angeles, while at the same time to help revitalize the current heart of this community. So this will be the first outdoor project of its kind that strategically uses an iconic street name, and it will anchor and provide context for public artwork and streetscape design. So we know that African-American culture, particularly Black South Los Angeles culture, has been consumed, it's been appropriated, and this community itself, their own creations, they do not get the benefit of. You can be in South Los Angeles and go over in Hollywood and see things sold over there that were created in this community, and they just don't get the financial reward. So this project is about placemaking, but it's also about revitalization and economic empowerment. So we know the many, many moves that came out of there. Beyond entertainment, there's the car and clothing culture. There's Kwanzaa, Black Lives Matter, the Pentecostal movement, Soul Train, Tina Turner. And there's also this renaissance of Black visual artists from South LA, Candy Wiley, Mark Bradford, Kerry James Marshall, and famous Black performing artists that are, huge supporters of this project. Kendrick Lamar, we all know that, he just performed, but we also know that he won the Pulitzer in 2018. And Nipsey Hussle was an early supporter, just a wonderful person who died in early 2019, supporter of this project. So the other most amazing thing is that this project, the impetus of this was a metro line. The city, if you fly into LAX now, you will be able to, after this multi-billion dollar infrastructure project is done, you'll be able to take the metro line from LAX right to the Blue Line. But what's so amazing is that in this area that you see in magenta that says Crenshaw Linear Museum, this was 1.3 mile. The city opted to save millions of dollars by running this train at grade through this community. Now, every place else where they ran this line, when they came to a community such as this, the vibrant commercial corridor in a neighborhood, they either elevated the train above or they tunneled below and put it beneath. So the community could not be more insulted that this was happening in 2017, 2018, but they decided to mobilize and really see an opportunity to really, take these lemons and make lemonade, as they often say. So this is the 1.3 miles from 60th to 48th Street. The orange stop that you see there at Slauson and Crenshaw is the metro stop that's happening there. So we really needed to think about how to tell this story. This is the most significant co-partnership, co-engagement, participatory that I've ever had. I mean, these, coming to that community is like coming to family in many ways. I mean, we eat together. We were just so in lockstep over several years in realizing how to make this happen, something that's unprecedented. This community in South Los Angeles is the largest intact Black community for multiple generations west of the Mississippi. And so we thought about the vision, and the vision is about celebrating the unique heritage. The assets there are amazing. You know, I literally had to be taken in a car and driven around to see the wonderful mural art, because it's, you know, it's not like Wynwood, if anybody's familiar in Miami, where it's kind of all in one place. You see this fantastic art and you know that this is a canvas for this. So leveraging those existing assets that they have, creating a unique experience and catalyzing that growth that I was telling you about. So in thinking about, this is a lot, you know, all the things that have to come together, not just architecture, it's landscape architecture, it's art, it's the interpretive or the exhibit design, and then dealing with the metro. I, at the time, was reading Dr. Mindy Fullalove's book, Root Shock, and she's a clinical psychologist and focuses on the ways social and environmental factors affect the mental health of communities. So she talks about, you know, over 400 years of African Americans from slavery till now, how maybe things as overt and as slavery and Jim Crow don't happen anymore, but there are things that are happening in rapid succession, such as deindustrialization, planned shrinkage, gentrification, that have the same impact to one's emotional ecosystem. So sort of looking back at this idea of root shock and how, you know, how did the Black African Americans get to this area of the country to begin with? We looked at the forced global slave migration, and then looking at the domestic migrations, obviously first one from south to north and second from south to west, and then looking at, you know, the census over the last 60 or so years, and looking at the blue areas and seeing how that the Black community has just really en masse are all now contained in that vertical area right where Crenshaw Boulevard runs. And so this notion of economy, all of these things that have to come together, as well as how can design, you know, be a lever to impact such severe issues. We thought about, you know, inspired by, metaphorically, a grass called the giant star grass of the African diaspora. It was used as bedding hay on slave ships from the Global Coast. And the thing about this grass is that it trailed the diaspora across the globe, and it just thrived in inhospitable conditions everywhere. And today, this grass is found on every inhabited continent, and in the United States, it's called Bermuda grass, and it's a rhizome grass, meaning it's just shallow roots, but very interconnected and strong, almost impenetrable, and anybody that deals with Bermuda grass knows that. And so this became the metaphor for this community that, in spite of root shock, Black LA has established a strong, interconnected, well-rooted and thriving. It flourishes, it creates, it defies you know, attempts at classification, mapping, and it grows like a rhizome with no single origin or genesis or end. So we took this notion of the rhizome growing, grow where you plant it, and we wanted to look at this experience through 4 lenses: improvisation, the resourcefulness, that is the positive outcome of struggle first, the first person stories of significant moments and historical first, dreams, the ability of this community to dream, what might be conceived, imaginary, or attainable, and finally, togetherness. The resilience of Black culture is born out of a togetherness that is both ancestral and an ongoing necessity. So Black people come together in everyday life to celebrate, mourn, resist, and worship. So I'll go through these last few slides quickly because I want to leave some time for questions here. We formed a connective tissue based on this notion of rhizome, with shade canopies, with story panels, with interpretation in the groundwork and in the streetscape. We also saw this project as it's all community inspired. So we partnered with local illustrators to represent historical figures and moments in a quintessentially Black LA aesthetic. We also looked at local illustrators to create a unique Crenshaw graphic pattern that's derived from this Black American tradition of quilt making. To look at branding and graphics in a very, very unique way that can only be found here, and that just really culturally stamps this space in a way that is not done before, particularly at the scale. This is also a project about environmental equity. We know in 2012, when the city moved the Space Shuttle Endeavour to the California Science Center, it wiped out every single tree. When I first went there, I looked down the boulevard and I couldn't believe I was actually standing in an American city that had not one tree, not one. And so looking at pocket parks and parkland and reforestation, also looking at 100 2D and 3D opportunities. The major commissions, 10 major artists were announced recently. Allison Sarr, Kehinde Wiley, Charles Dixon, Artist Lane, Mel Edwards, among a few that will punctuate this wonderful boulevard, in addition to emerging artists and 3D artwork. Putting a landmark sign to mark, this experience from the sky, 120 feet high. And also, thinking about these pocket parks, how the art integrates into them. And this is the wall. Anybody that's been in Crenshaw knows the wall. It's been there for decades. It's a mural wall that has had several iterations over its decades lifetime, but looking how to highlight that and make that an asset. And finally, the part of the experience that's under construction now is Sankofa Park. The word Sankofa is an African term and symbol that literally means to go back and get what was taken. So African-American scholars often coin the term to mean remembering our past to protect our future. So at one of the meetings, a woman held up, we asked them to bring anything to speak about that meant anything to them. She brought the Sankofa and talked about what it meant to her and her family. And that was the inspiration for the design of Sankofa Park, an edifice that accommodates this togetherness, people coming together at the end of the park, but that rises as you move forward, but turns back on itself and looks back down the 1.3 Boulevard, but is a wonderful celebration of art, providing places, canopy that's culturally stamped with that rhizome pattern is pretty much everywhere as we seek to place make and bring continuity to the space, looking back down the 1.3 Boulevard and just remembering the spirit of Sankofa about looking back to move forward. So that is Destination Crenshaw in a nutshell. Probably the fastest way that I was able to get through it, but that's the end of what I have to say. I'd love to take some questions from you guys.